Thank you, Mal, thank you, Ian, for inviting me here and for letting me do this louder. Okay, I'll try. For allowing me to present some of my excerpts from my collection. First of all, photographs which I will be showing here for the presentation are mostly of Mark Mautner, Jeff Scoville, few of John Schneider, and some humble work from myself. As Mal said, I'm a collector from Poland, and as Poland is, as you may know, is in Europe, it's quite far from Africa and from Tsumeb as well. But as one of my mineral friends said, I'm in a lack of having the best collection of Tsumeb in Poland. And I agree completely with that because there is no other, to say the truth. So my collecting of Tsumeb started, to say the truth, with carbonates. Early in my collecting, I was collecting everything, of course, from every locality at the start. But soon I realized that carbonates are one of my favorite mineral species. So that hooked me into Tsumeb because, as all of you know, Tsumeb is a great locality for world-class carbonates. So I would like to start this talk, this presentation, with carbonates, of course. Here's one of my favorites. It's, of course, calcite. Yes, it's a similar matrix, that's true. Because the matrix is cobalton dolomite, and I can say fairly that's cobalton because I analyzed it, of course, and there is a fair amount of cobalt in that one. Calcites are pretty gemmy, and the contrast is really nice for the piece, so it looks quite significant on the shelf when lit properly. The sizes are on the bottom of every slide, I hope so, at least. I try to put them. Unfortunately in centimeters, but I think we'll manage to get something to it. The next piece is also quite often seen from Tsumeb. These are complex nail-head calcites with only the tops which are dusted with minute crystals of daphtite, confirmed daphtite, of course, analyzed. And these pieces are often, they have this sparkly look to them. I tried to find out why is that, and when I sent one of the crystals for an analysis, it turned out that all of the faces of the crystals are covered by small minute crystals of ankerite. And that's probably, these are also supposed for giving this specimen the color, which is on the sides. You can see it's not white, it's rather creamy. That's why probably the ankerite is the cause of that. This piece is for the calcite is quite big, for this kind of calcite, I mean. It's a gemmy, it didn't work pretty well on the photograph, but it is really gemmy, like an aquarium. You can see through the piece, you can see the matrix underneath. And on the matrix, you have the black hematite and conicalcite, green stuff, and the edges are colored by inclusions of iron from the hematite, which gives it a quite interesting and attractive look. And the stepped growth on the crystal is also very nice to see, especially with the proper lighting. Another one of the calcites, this one these are the intergrown. It may not be seen on the picture because it might look quite flat, but in fact these are two balls intergrown of primary calcite, on which then dioptase deposited. And there are some areas which are lighter green, as you can see here, and everywhere on the piece. These areas are duftite, although it's a mixture, to say the truth, it's a mixture with motromite, but mostly duftite. And then, on top of that, the second generation of really jammy calcites grew. And with those, you can nicely see, for instance, here, nice phantoms inside the crystals, nice dioptase phantoms. The next piece is quite unusual color for something like that, for the calcite, because we usually think that reddish ones are the cause of the color is iron. With this one, when I bought it, when I saw it, I was quite suspicious because the matrix, what is the framework for this specimen, is pure motromite. So it was quite unusual to have suddenly quite a lot of iron to color the crystals like that. So I ran the extensive analysis on that, and it turned out that the coloring agent here for the crystals is minium, so it's lead oxide, not iron oxide as usual. Here is another one, also colorful. The underneath botryoidal growths on which the calcites are deposited. Here it's motromite duftite, but it's more motromite than duftite. The calcites here are some of them are these are flattened crystals, but some of these are colored by inclusions, yellow by inclusions of this motromite. But some of them, as you can see on top, are colored red, this time from hematite, because hematite is on that specimen. You cannot see that, but on the sides and on the back, there is quite a lot of blackish hematite deposit, even on the motromite. So with this one, the coloring agent is really iron oxides. Next species, carbonate, is aragonite. Usually when we talk about aragonites from Tsumeb, we usually think about tarnovicites, right? Because the usual habit of spiky crystals is not very often at Tsumeb. This one is one of pretty nice examples, not the prettiest thing to look at, but one of the nicest examples of almost pure aragonite. It has some traces of copper, which are probably from the malahide, which is growing around the piece. But anyway, the habit is typical for pure aragonite. So it's quite unusual for the locality. This one is more common, although the shell of dolomite cast in which the crystals of tarnovicite decided to grow inside, it's not that common. So it's a dolomite cast, and inside you have those pretty nice pearly tarnovicites, with also with the malahide, which is probably overgrowing the copper with cuprite aggregates. And this is quite unusual association for tarnovicites, because the blocky crystals are tarnovicite. And as you can see, there is one pretty well-defined azurite crystal protruding through them. And on the matrix, we have some conicalcite. But the association is quite unusual for the species. Now, dolomite. With dolomite, we usually don't, when we talk about dolomites from Tsumeb, I'm usually fond of those creatures, casts. This one is especially close to my heart. It resembles me, one-eyed monster with some scales on the side. Pretty unusual stuff, especially with those layering and the fact that the layers are not only different structure, not only different structure, but also different colors. So it's pretty unusual and very aesthetic piece. Another one is pink dolomite cast over the calcites. I cannot say whether it's cobaltan because I haven't analyzed this one, but it's probably because of the cobalt. And on the other side, as you can see on that picture, we have quite nice wolfenite crystals. One is pretty big. It's, if I remember correctly, it's about 15 or 16 millimeters wide. So for the deposition on the cast, it's quite nice. Of course, on those casts, you can have many different species, to say the truth, that are deposited later. I had casts which were, of course, with wolfenite, but some with azurite, which is not that common. Also with, for instance, pyrite or even sphalerite. And malahide, of course, with copper. So many different species can deposit later after these funny things were created. And there is one more cast, which is quite unusual. It's very lightweight. When you hold it in your hand, it feels like a balsa wood or something like that, because as you can see through the missing tips here, you can see that these are completely hollow inside. And these are after scalenohedral calcite crystals. Probably color is due to copper inclusions, but I sent samples for analysis, but the traces of copper are probably on such low level that the analysis didn't show anything. But probably yes, probably with copper inclusions. Now we go from calcium-bearing to copper-bearing carbonates. So first of all, we have this winter version of azurites. Nice crystals of pretty good color and not much of the pseudomorphose started. And they are all sprinkled with those snow caps of white dolomite. Very aesthetic piece, and I really enjoy looking at that on the shelf. Really, really one of my favorites azurites. Although acquired quite early during my collecting, as you can see from the number. The next one is, I admire the shape of this group of bladed crystals, which are grown together like a fan. They are pretty good. They are of pretty good quality and really nice color. And the shape is pretty amazing. There is another. Also, I bought it for the aesthetics of the look and quite unusual grouping of the crystals. This one resembles the flower, or it's a subspherical group of crystals with quite nice color, resembling the ones from Milpias, because it's quite good degree of electric blue, as we call it, with some malahide and dolomite in the matrix, and also some duftite on the matrix. But the shape is pretty cool. That one is also pretty unusual for the association. I would, if I would given this talk 2 years ago, I would say adamite, Cuprian adamite. But now I have to say that it's zinc-olevinite growing on top of those nicely colored, nice complex azurite crystals, which are sitting on a dolomite matrix covered by some iron oxides, giving them this reddish color. But association, as I said, association is really quite unusual. And this one is one of the older pieces. If I remember correctly, let me check. Because there is a similar piece. Yeah, there is a similar piece at Harvard University, which was acquired by them from Holden collection in 1912. So that's quite an old one. And what's more interesting, the green stuff is baledonite. And what is even more interesting, as you can see, the green stuff is pseudomorphing something. And in some areas, you can see that those crystals which are pseudomorphed after are resembling azurite rather than mimetite. So this one is probably the baledonite after the azurite crystals. And then the second generation of azurite came in and adorned the piece so that it doesn't look so boring green. That's one of also the older pieces. I found these referenced, because these were similar pieces to that were offered for sale to Charles Palache in 1922. So these are from the early levels of the mine. The matrix here is white smithsonite. Sometimes it's more white, sometimes as on this specimen. It's reddish blue, reddish brown, and it's because the smithsonite is covered by the layer of tsumeb, which of course I analyzed, that's why I know. One would say, why is it not yellow and rather reddish? That's because there are some substitutions in tsumeb tending it to be more malahide than tsumeb. So malahide is reddish in color. That's why probably the color here of this layer is reddish brown. This is one of the interesting pieces. That's also from the with some older reference, because that was bought by Robert Max Wilke, and he acquired that piece in 1928 according to his labels. The funny thing about that piece is that, as you can see, there are many azurites in that nest, but there is only mostly one of the group of them, which is totally pseudomorphed by malahide, and the others are left intact. Of course, from the aesthetic point of view, it's a great piece because it's have nice contrast, but I wonder why the pseudomorphing process stopped at only that part of the specimen. I don't know. The next piece is well known, of course, habit from Perkin Sams packet with these blocky crystals, partially pseudomorphed by malahide. And of course, you can see this characteristic brecciam matrix on the bottom of the specimens. It's around 12 centimeters high, so quite nice chunk of azurite with malahide. This one I love. Even though it's totally pseudomorphed by malahide, the shape of the original azurite crystals is preserved really sharply, really nicely. And the patterns and this vibrating look of it is really something very special. I didn't see much of the specimens of such pseudomorphosis with that rich patterns on the surfaces of the crystals. It's not, unfortunately, it's not very big. It's 4.5 centimeters high. I would love it would be higher, but well, it is what it is. The next one is primary malahide. Its ball is 23 millimeters in diameter, and it's sitting on the pinkish dolomite, which is probably colored by iron oxides, but gives a really nice contrast for the specimen between the green and the pink one. The next one, the green, I mean, there are two greens, to say the truth. The stuff that is deposited on the malahide pseudomorphs, of course, it's a smithsonite, and that's also copper-rich. That's analyzed and checked, so I'm pretty convenient about that. And the shape of the shape of the structure of these crystals is also pretty unique for the specimen. The next one is also one of the older pieces. That was in Kegel collection, which then was sold to Smithsonian, and Smithsonian was the owners, and sold to Bill and Carol Smith in '54. I like the shape of the specimen because it resembles me a boat with some guy sitting in it. The rose, which is in the center of this malahide pseudomorph azurite, is of course a smithsonite, but it's iron-rich. It's not cobalton or something like that. It's just iron-rich one. But the contrast between those two is pretty amazing, and the history, of course, is also very interesting for that piece. The next one is we came across, and we are now with rosazite. As you can see, there are some blocky crystals, rhombohedral here, and these are smithsonites. And as you can see also, these have yellow cores. The outside of the crystals is greenish, but the cores are yellow. Underneath the rosazite, you can see the black stuff. This is goethite, which is underneath probably the whole area, which is covered with rosazite. And those crystals with yellow cores grew exactly on the goethite. So the these yellow cores are due to inclusions of yellow needles of goethite. That's why this nice zoning appeared here. Also, this area, this is white dolomite, but as you can see, there are some also orange-yellow crystals areas here. These are also dolomite, but also included with goethite. That's why they have this different color to them. And this specimen gives a really nice overview of what Tsumeb can do with green stuff. There are quite a few shades of green and sea green. The base, I will start from the base. It's a duftite, solid, and also the rosettes of duftite pseudomorphic mimetites. On that, the azurites grew, which were then pseudomorphed by malahide, of course. And on top of that, the rosazite came, and it started to, I think, here in that area, with pseudomorphic. But in that area, as you can see, it's forming rather a crust over the pseudomorphed crystal. And there is additional pieces to the element because of this white area on which the balls of azurite started forming again. It's nothing special, it's just calcite. I checked that, but it adds to the aesthetic of the specimen and looks even more interesting with that. Okay, we are changing now to lead-bearing carbonates. That's one of the snowflake cerusites in my collection. Quite remarkable for the size. As you can see, it's 18 centimeters wide, 14 high. So not the biggest one from Tsumeb, of course, but quite nice with the good luster and translucency. This is the other one. This one has quite a distinctive look with this orange coating. It's not, these are not inclusions because it's only a thin layer on the surface of the crystals. Probably iron oxides, but I haven't checked that yet, so cannot say for sure. But the look is really nice, and I love this crystal. And this is something quite unusual. This comes from the early levels of the mine, even probably from the outcrop from the Green Hill. There are two kinds of, or two generations probably of cerusite. The thicker one, which are covered by this orange-brown goethite. And there are also the other ones, as you can see on the specimens, which are gemmy, clear. And on both of them, there are areas with inclusions of the blue-green stuff. These inclusions were, of course, analyzed, and it's usual stuff from the Green Hill or upper levels. It's linerite with brochantite. On the matrix, we have also, besides those two copper-bearing ones, there is also some malahide. And there are also the guy that was working on that piece, because I sent it as a whole for him, found also the areas which are selenium rich on the matrix. And with EDS analysis, he isolated the crystals of monacatite. So that's something which Shields, I believe, found on some of the specimens, but also there are some others, as you can see. That's another one, not particularly great and beautiful, but for Tsumeb, it's quite unusual and not very often visible. Not very beautiful because it's highly etched by the solutions which came through it. The brown areas are rich with iron oxides, which probably came with the solution. But there are also, interestingly, there are also scattered on those areas small yellow mimetite crystals. And they are on the back of the specimen also, but also on the front of the specimens. Here also. Okay, now we go to one of my favorite minerals from all over the world. It's a smithsonite. And this one, the first one, although it's white, it has a quite distinctive look because of this rosettes of wheat sheaf crystals with nice patterns. The matrix is mostly from chalcocite, but there are also some, during the analysis I found also some greenockite crystals on the matrix. That piece is also the old one. I found a similar piece in, I think it's also in Kegel collection. Yeah, that I found that there is a specimen at Smithsonian Institution from Kegel collection, which is attributed to 9th level, which looks exactly like this one. So we are looking at the pretty nice plate. Fortunately, not even and flat, but having some really nice 3D look to it, covered with those olive green smithsonite crystals. That's not a big piece, but it's quite an unusual to have this crystal habit for the green smithsonite. I haven't seen many of them. This one is enriched with copper, because I analyzed that, and sitting on the white calcite matrix. But as I said, the green stuff is usually botryoidal or wheat sheaf, but not many of those rhombohedral ones in the specimens. That's quite an unusual piece. I found similar also to this one. In Harvard University, there is a piece which was formerly in Wilhelm Klein collection, found on 8th level, which looks very similar to that one. And as you can see, I also, on the details, I show you the inside of the stalactite. It's quite complex because there are layers. The outer layer is, of course, cupran smithsonite. There's a layer of rosazite on malahide. But as you can see, there is also the hollow pipe inside, small one. But inside, there is also the rosazite. So the process was quite complicated with creating this one. And of course, as a Tsumeb collector and also a smithsonite collector, I wouldn't be 100% smithsonite collector without having a blue packet smithsonite. This one is pretty nice example, I like to think, because the groups of the crystals are not forming a mass of crystals in one location, but they are richly scattered around the whole piece, which gives it, I think, in my opinion, better look. You can see the typical zoning in the crystals. The outer layer of the crystals is more jammy, and the cores are more cloudy, which is typical for the find for the blue packet. That piece was quite early in my collection. It's a pink smithsonite. I don't know whether it's cobaltan because I haven't analyzed that one, but I can pretty fairly say that it might be. It's also pretty three-dimensional. It doesn't look maybe on the picture like it is, but there are some nice structures in the VAC which are covered by those crystals. Another pinky one, but this time with really different habit. Those spiky crystals, much paler in color. So with that one, probably even the analysis wouldn't say anything about the coloring agent. Probably cobaltan, but oh well, who knows. But anyway, really nice piece, and for the habit, quite unusual. That one is, well, we see many flattened smithsonite, pink smithsonite crystals, But on this particular piece, there's some areas, as you can see, red ones, and these are red quartzes. The color in the quartzes are probably from iron oxides. I don't know yet, haven't been analyzing that one yet. But overall, the composition and the association with this red quartz is quite unique for the specimen. And that one is one of my favorites. This one is called millipede. It's really fine example of parallel growing of flattened crystals. And these crystals are also showing, as you can see, they are pale pink in color in some areas, but the edges of the crystals show different coloring. It's more strong because of the inclusions of relic sulfides, mostly galena, on the edges of those crystals. But the overall look of the piece is pretty amazing. It's definitely one of my favorite smithsonites in the collection. That one is also high on the list of my favorites, smithsonites. The red-orange color is from the iron oxides, which are, but the crystal itself is not, as a whole, is not of that color. The core of the crystals are translucent. Only the last 1 millimeter layer of the crystal is included by those iron oxides, but I think quite richly because of the very distinctive color and richness of it for this smithsonite. The yellow ones, which we usually call as cadmium one, but we are often mistaken because many times the yellow one, especially if it's pale yellow in color, it's due to the iron inclusions. As I tested many of my specimens, many of them turned out to be iron enriched. With that one, we also have the crystals are pretty big and showing this spiky habit, but also there are some gemmy cerusites here and on the sides, which adorn the specimen. Here's another yellow one. With that one, analysis didn't show, to say the truth, anything. Not even traceable amounts of iron or cadmium, so I really don't know what's the coloring agent in that. But the color is pretty nice, and the crystals are up to 2 centimeters, calinohedral ones on the plate, so that's also highly on my list of favorite smithsonites. And getting to the end of smithsonites, we have some stalactitic growths in Tsumeb, of course. The most common one being that one. I even saw the piece here in Tucson with a big plate of such stalactites. I don't remember where exactly, but there is this piece. The color is due to iron inclusions, and it's sitting on a dolomite cast. The middle one is, of course, apple green Cuprian one. With that one, I'm sure, because the copper traces were detected. And the last one is growing on the goethite stalactites. There are goethite stalactites inside, and the smithsonite is overgrowing them. There is a third stalactite on the back, which is not visible, but this is a group of 3 of them. And there are these 2 strange little guys. The leftmost, when you would see such specimen presented to you, you would probably say that's siderite, judging by the color. And you wouldn't be that far because I bought it as a dolomite, but the color was quite strange. And it turned out to be iron-rich smithsonite. So a little bit more iron and it would be siderite. The other guy is even more interesting, the one on the right. It's quite small, that's why I could send it for the analysis as a whole piece. The color is really unusual. So the analysis results were also quite unusual for that one. There's of course iron and magnesium besides zinc in that one, but there are also areas of cinnabar inclusions in that specimen. So that makes him quite rare and unusual smithsonite specimen. And because as you know, cinnabar is not very common in Tsumeb. And siderites. That one is a VAC in a chalcocite matrix filled with those gemmy brownish siderites. But the other one is even more interesting. This is from the unique find on 44th or 6th level, if I remember it correctly. 46th level, which Gebhardt is talking about. The siderites, the platy crystals of siderite are supposed to be nickel-rich, although I haven't analyzed it yet, so I cannot confirm whether it is or not. It's accompanied with quartz tips, of course, with some chalcocite, which you can see, for instance, here. And there are also those bipyramidal crystals. These ones, after analysis, turned out to be the intermediate in the series of scheelite and powellite, but much closer to the scheelite end member from the group. Gebhardt also says that there are some stotate crystals involved in that paragenesis, but I haven't found any on my specimens, unfortunately. Okay, so of course, I'm not only collecting carbonates, so right now let's go to some other species. Let's start with arsenates. Right now there is only one adamite on that end on the presentation because all my other adamites went to the back end of the presentation as zinc-olivinites. So this is a quite nice sample of yellow ones, broad tabular crystals, which are accompanied by those white wheat-sheaf smithsonites and sitting on chalcocite matrix covered with tzumkarite. That's a nice sample of arsene tsumebite, which is, of course, type locality. Tsumeb is type locality for the species. But finding a nicely crystallized arsene tsumebite, it's not that easy in Tsumeb. This one is pretty nicely crystallized. There are also some interesting areas. We have quite a few anglesite crystals, but there are also these blackish, bluish areas which are covered by covalite, minute covalite crystals. Other arsenate, which is not that common in Tsumeb, which is austenite. In Tsumeb, it's mostly copper-enriched one, and that one is growing on the matrix covered with conicalcite underneath, but the outer layer of those crystals are austenite, analyzed and confirmed, of course. Another pretty common mineral in Tsumeb is baeldonite. but mostly as dustings or accompanying minerals on the specimens. Nicely crystallized ones are not that often. This is one of the habits that Beildonite showed in Tsumeb. These are platy crystals, thin platy crystals of Beildonite, and the light green stuff is duftite, filling that vacuum in the matrix. Here we have budantite from a unique find. I think that was on in the second oxidation zone on 27th level, where we had a matrix of quartz covered by those. The grayish stuff is just dusting of hematite, and the budantites are quite richly scattered around the specimen. The characteristic thing for that find was also that there were some wolfenites, and here you can have wolfenite on the specimen. These are quite big and rich for the species. Here's another species which is the type locality is Tsumeb. That's a duftite, of course, very common one. Very common one for the mine, but not with that habit. We have a cast here, which we saw many, of course, were from by dolomites or even smithsonite, but for the duftite, it's not quite often. Mimetite. This one is also from the older finds. Similar pieces in the British Museum of Natural History. And the interesting thing about that one is that upon analysis of their specimen, they found out that there's some significant phosphate substitution in the specimen. I haven't analyzed mine, so I cannot confirm whether it's also the case in my specimen. Another mimetite, a very gemmy one on quartz-covered matrix with a really extraordinary color. Of course, gem packet, mimetite, with the yellow stuff on the matrix and also included in the crystals. The yellow stuff is supposed to be beaverite, but upon analysis of mine, I found out that it's a mixture of gartrolite with beaverite rather than the pure beaverite. Another one with a distinctive habit, looking like campylites from other localities, sitting on a calcite matrix covered with goethite and with some white willemite on the side. A very interesting one, framework of the specimen is copper with cuprite covered by malahide, and then on top of all of that, the yellow-orange mimetite grew. Quite often we can see the pseudomorphing of mimetite after cerussites. Usually it's after single crystals, but with that specimen, it's quite unusual that the whole plate of cerussite twins were pseudomorphed by the mimetite. And cincholivenite. With that one, I'm really not sure whether it's still adamite or cincholivenite, because the color is really pale green, as you can see. But I put it anyway on the cincholivenite side for the presentation. That one is quite obvious, bottle green color with wolfenite on the side. And the yellow stuff is upon two analysis in two different places. I came with the resolution that it's tsumcorite with Phillips boronite and some addition of the quartz. Tsumeb, this one maybe not the best for the species, but quite interesting because of the, as you can see on the detailed here, there is zoning in the crystals of Tsumeb, lighter areas outside and smaller crystals which were postponed, later deposited, and the cores are darker ones. The darker areas are Tsumeb, and the outer zones are in fact ferrilotamerite. Here we have a pretty nice and interesting sample of motromite. This one is with, it's a mixture of motromite with the tangite. The lighter areas are, the darker areas are having more motromite, and the lighter areas are having less motromite and more tangite. That's why this camouflage-like pattern showed up. Another motromite, also bicolored, this one with some dioptase crystals on the surfaces, but also with this, the color, I don't know to say the truth what's the reason for this red-brown color. Probably, I would suspect, iron oxides also, but I haven't checked that yet from that specimen, so cannot be sure. Wulfenites. This is a pretty nice example with the top crystal around 26 millimeters, if I remember correctly, on the dolomite matrix with some malahide. That one is, these are very lustrous with complex faces, wulfenite crystals on creamy dolomite. Some say that these are from the golden packet, but I never heard to say the truth about that one. So it's, but I like the name. Golden packet, it fits it quite good. This is a distinctive one because of the reddish color, which is probably due to iron oxides also because of the blackish area here. I haven't analyzed that specimen, so I cannot say for sure what's the reason of this red color, but it seems likely that the blackish area here are iron oxides or something like that, from which the iron could walk to the wulfenite crystals. And one which is quite unusual, these are milky white wulfenite crystals covered by quartz almost totally. And on the matrix we have smithsonite with some goethite and coronadite, which would suggest that this is from the early minings, early levels of the mine or even the outcrop. We have some dioptases here with smithsonite matrix with malahide for the additional element. Here we have a Christmas tree with the find in the deeper, I think it was in third oxidation zone with the yellow wulfenites between those dioptase crystals. This is pretty nice sample of the dioptase because it's a 32 crystal is 32 millimeters in height, so it's quite big for the Tsumeb mine as for the dioptase. I love that one because of the contrast with the matrix. It's not the usual white calcite, but it's rather the complex pinkish, salmon pinkish color, and with duftite dusting on the edges of those calcite crystals. I really like the look of it. And another strange piece is a group of stalactitic formations of calcite, which are preferentially overgrown by, on one side, first by duftites and then by a thin layer of dioptase crystals. And last one from the dioptases is not a very often seen association with cerussite, and not only with one cerussite, but also with a group of cerussite twins scattered among the dioptase crystals. Quite unusual and rare. Oxides. We have this really rich interwoven mats of chalcotrihite sitting on both sides of the specimen and sitting on the brownish dolomite. That's a pretty nice galena crystal with unusual habit, adorned by the dolomite crystals and with really nice iridescence. It's only goethite, but I really love the look of it, the shape and the mossy look of the lower parts with this brownish hue. Pyrite is common from many localities, but not from Tsumeb. Well, it is quite common as an associated mineral with matrices and so on, but with specimens for the collectors, it's not that often to see something really enjoyable. And this one is pretty nice. It's sitting, the pyrite aggregates are sitting on the hematite matrix. Both of these, the gray stuff and the red stuff, are both hematite. And the tennantite, one of my favorites from the collection because it's twin, but also the cover, the reddish hue you can see on the faces is due to the deposition of a small platy crystals of copper with cuprite. And some rarities to end up with. First of all, alamosite with balls of melanotekite. The gray stuff on which it was sitting on was mostly galena and chalcocite. The next one is pretty well-known paragenesis for that find, for the mineral. The green, apple green stuff is shenevixite with brownish ferrilotar mayerite. And the dark green groups, aggregates, are zinc-olivenite. And the funny thing is that here you have areas of bluish coverage on the matrix, and it turned out to be a mix of silver with zinc-olivenite. This is a pretty big, for the species, group of spray of ecatite crystals, sitting on the tennantite matrix with some chalcocite and hematite. Two ludlokites from two distinctive finds. The left one, I call it a hairy monster. It was from the later find with latite in the lower part. On the right side, we have the specimen from the initial find by Charlie Key and Ludlow. And the really nice element in that specimen is this thick and quite high ludlockite aggregate, which is around, if I remember correctly, 15 millimeters high and around 2 millimeters thick. So it's, for the species, is really big crystal. Linerite, it might not be the rarest thing from Tsumeb because in the first oxidation zone was quite often, but in the other ones, in the later ones, it wasn't easy to find anything. That's a quite rich sample with cerussites all over the specimen with linerite crystals, and the cerussites are colored blue, not only by the linerite, but also by the caledonite, which is also found on the piece, and by brochantite, which is also found on the piece. The matrix is dolomite with some coronadite on top of that, and with some malahide layers between them. That's heady fun. The hollow pipes are well-known pseudomorphs or epimorphs of heady fan after the mimetite crystals. These are quite richly adorning this piece with the nice, also the nice lining of the wulfenite crystals across the piece. Maubeite, so the red sumcorite. With that piece, the analyses were quite uncertain when I acquired that piece, because EDS analysis showed that it is Maubeite, but when I sent the crystal for the XRD, it turned out to be a mixture of sumcorite with Maubeite, but tending to more sumcorite. So I sacrificed another crystal and set it for analysis, for the zone analysis in the crystal by EDS. And it turned out to be that the outer layer is Maubeite, but the core of the crystal is sumcorite, in fact. Pretty cool pistachio green molybdophorone acide on dioptase with those calcite crystals exhibiting the window to the dioptase inside. Quite unusual charetite crystal. Unusual because it's not on the matrix, it's on the chunk of solid calcite, with the brownish stuff being a mixture of siderite and smithsonite. I found similar piece in Pinch's collection, the floater type like on this calcite matrix. And the scorodite. These are, I don't have the right the size, but I know that the biggest crystal, which tip you can see out there, is 37 millimeters high. So it's quite big for the specimen. As you can see, the top of the group of the sprays adorned by the second generation of smaller crystals, but these are interesting because these are included with this yellow bedpagdalite, which is much less visible in the bigger crystals in the main spray. Another quite well-known paragenesis, it's segnitite crystals with duftite balls and the apple green spherical aggregates of arsensumebite. And the silver. It's from this. Silver is found in many places in the mine, but there was also, I think, there was only one find where you can see the real crystallization of silver, and that's from that find. You can see nice crystals here, there, of silver. And also some areas of zinc olevinite with calcite, and on the back there is cuprite with copper. That one was long thought to be lateite, but then after analysis it turned out to be one of the nicest, biggest crystals of stibioclaudetite. The specimen is 17 millimeters high, and that's roughly the size of the longest crystal. That's too unusual, two rare specimens for the mine. One being gypsum, which in Tsumeb is not that often, and the other one, the pale green spearmint one, is tomecekite, which quite often is associated with gypsum. And finally, Tsumebite, which is type locality, with blocky azurite crystals and smithsonite on the matrix. And the last one is zinc artrolite, which is connected here with darker green duftite aggregates. Yeah, so that would be all what I wanted to show. Thank you.